The only police interview with Martin Bryant between Inspectors Warren and Payne, and there's technical glitches with the tape. There are a multitude of inaudible responses from Martin, so questions are asked, literally says inaudible. And of course the only aspects of that we've seen on the media are just certain segments, so we don't have any context as to whether that interview may have been edited. I guess from a police point of view, because you're an ex-police officer, what's your perspective on the way that was conducted, the legality of it, the operation?
It's got no legality whatsoever. As soon as Martin Bryant says, "What about my lawyer?" he must have an adult person with him, or his solicitor, or both. And he's neither of that.
Welcome to the Wasp Files. Some of this material may be distressing and viewer discretion is advised. Hello again, Andrew. Welcome back to the Wasp Files. We thought we would do another episode and just follow on from our previous discussions about the aspects that we just discussed with the tragedy, and then see if we could also cover some other areas and also some of the associated events with other shootings. And also I'd be very interested to hear your opinions on, of course, the Bondi shooting that's recently played out on the Australian media somewhat 3 weeks ago. But yeah, good to talk to you again. So I guess let's just jump straight into it and just talk about, I guess, all the other aspects of Port Arthur and the associated events and people that provide some insight into what was going on with that crime, who was involved, and what the potential ramifications were prior and after.
Right.
So,
thank you for that. Paul, look, can you remember you sent me the PDF of the full police interview transcript on not so long ago? Because I've never seen that.
Oh.
When I got the original police interview, it had been censored greatly, and I typed all that out, so I knew pretty much. But I know the DPP Tim Ellis had sent us the full unedited version, but that went to John Blasky in Tasmania, and he made it into a PDF form, but I never saw it. And so when you sent it to me, I found some extremely interesting things. Why would the police censor or remove certain things that Martin Bryant said?
So this is the police interview that took place between Inspectors Warren and Payne
on the 4th of July.
And this was with Martin Bryant. He'd spent some months inside Risdon Prison. He'd been incarcerated. He was still apparently wheeled in a wheelchair because he was burnt on his back, and so apparently was still suffering from some medical.
Yes. All right. Martin Bryant made some statements. The first one was that he didn't stop at Midway Point where he was seen by Angelo Casarius. He didn't stop at Sorel where he was seen by Spiro Diamantis, but he did stop at Sorel at a bakery and got a coffee there. He didn't stop at Fawcett with the Shell Surgery where he was seen by Gary King, and when he reached Tirana, he turned left to the Nabina Road to go to Roaring Beach, and he was at Roaring Beach for some time. He had a swim there. Then he forgot a towel, so he couldn't use a towel to dry himself up, but he would have changed gear. He then went back to Nabina, stopped at a shop and bought a coffee and a toasted sandwich, and then from there went to Seascape Cottage.
So this is Martin's testimony about his whereabouts and his movements prior to his attendance at Seascape Cottage, which fly in the face of the odd events which I espoused in a previous episode, which I called the breadcrumbs episode, which is what you were referring to, where a blonde-haired individual stopped at those places you mentioned and did odd things, like bought a cigarette lighter for $1.50 and left $1.80 change in small change on the counter and walked out quickly. Said some odd things about going surfing, even though the water was calm. And then the weird one at the supermarket with Diamantis, where Spiros Diamantis noticed somebody odd who bought a bottle of tomato sauce.
Carrying a big Prince bag.
So it was suspicious enough for him to watch, but it's like, and later on, Brian, in that interview with Inspectors Warren and Payne, had stated, why would I buy a bottle of tomato sauce? Which, of course, is a very good question. So you've got these odd events, but you're saying that in that unedited, unredacted police transcript, which has a lot of problems anyway, Martin's testimony is that he didn't do any of those things.
Yes. Now, this is the real interesting thing. Had he done them, what would have been in his Volvo? There would have been a cigarette lighter. There's no mention of a cigarette lighter. There would have been a bottle of tomato sauce. No mention of a bottle of sauce. There would have been an empty cup and lid of the coffee that was drunken at Fawcett at the service station, as seen by Gary King. Wasn't in there. And there would have been the small tin of coins that he used on at least 2 occasions.
Yeah, I do remember that he said that he didn't have a lot of money on him, so that's why he couldn't get... He said he didn't go to the Port Arthur historic site on multiple occasions because he didn't have the money to get in there and only had these small, jar of coins.
I think it was $16 he had. He apparently under $20. Now, but the next thing is really interesting. The person with the yellow Volvo who stopped and spoke to Gay Lind and a friend Vicky and bought the marijuana from them with a $50 note. Martin Bryant doesn't have a $50 note. He's waiting for his next payment from provincial trustees, which is going to come in May, which is only a couple of days away. And then, when he enters the Port Arthur Historic Site, he again pays with a $50 note.
So that's
a $100 note that Martin Bryant didn't have.
Yeah, so the person who was spotted, and once again, the interaction with the 2 girls who he stopped, fixed their broken down van by finding a loose wire. Martin was not known for his aptitude mechanically. And then, buys a bag of marijuana off them for $50, and apparently they were slightly bemused because it was
slightly overpriced.
Yeah, it was a large amount to pay for a small amount of dope at the time. And then told them that he was going down to get rid of some wasps, and you said, you can join me down at the cafe, we can grab a coffee. So once again, you've got this weird, odd breadcrumb that people noticed about this person. But yeah, the money is an interesting thing because this guy's handing out $50 notes, whereas Martin's paying, or someone is paying for things with small change and leaving coins on the counter. Same with the tomato sauce bottle. Apparently that was paid with a large amount of small change. So there's a discrepancy between the what was bought and how much money and what type of money was used to buy it.
Right. So now we consider, if it wasn't Martin Bryant, who could it have been?
Well, that's the salient question, isn't it?
No, it's quite easy. It can only have been the gunman at the Port Arthur Historic Site, the long blonde head. And all the people would remember, they wouldn't remember Martin Bryant on the day, couldn't give an iota, it's irrelevant. But once they see the photograph of Martin Bryant in the Hobart Mercury, the long hair, immediate associate, the long hair bloke who stopped here and did the various purchases.
Yeah, I mean, the signature surfy blonde hair.
There's your breadcrumbs. It wasn't Martin Bryant. Martin Bryant drove down there, stopped at the Sorel. We hear nothing about the Sorel Bakery, but that's where he said he stopped. And I can guarantee you that the person who served him would have made a police statement. He's seen at Rolling Beach by 2 other people wearing, what do you call those, surfing...
Like wind cheater type?
The black,
or a wetsuit?
The wetsuit. They're both wearing wetsuits, and I'll guarantee you that they would have reported seeing the yellow Volvo with the surfboard on top to the police, and again, the shopkeeper at Nabina who served him with a hot coffee and a toasted sandwich would have again reported that.
So I didn't know that he had been witnessed actually at the beach by other beach goers wearing a wetsuit.
The people he saw him were wearing the wetsuit. He apparently went swimming pretty much naked, apparently.
Right, okay. That's interesting. So then you've got this discrepancy. What we're trying to get to the bottom of is Martin, as we know, leaves his house in Clare Street, Newtown, in the morning after he departs from his girlfriend, Petra Wilmot, who spent the night with him. They had breakfast together. She leaves, according to her statement, at 8 o'clock in the morning. And according to the police, the alarm was set at 30 Clare Street, Newtown at 9:47 a.m.
May I? No.
No.
No. There is no police statement anywhere that says that Martin Bryant's alarm system had been set. That was stated by the DPP, Damien Bugg. And it's a lie, because there is no evidence in any of the police statements to suggest that.
Okay, so there we've got a statement or a report of an alarm being set, but your information is that doesn't exist in any police statements. So at some point, Martin leaves ostensibly his home in Newtown, and then, according to his statements, goes, gets a coffee and something to eat, and goes down to Roaring Beach for a swim. And then we've got, if we go back, we circle back a bit, because the unredacted police transcript, which you've read, as we know, and I've covered in copious amounts of information and statements and episodes, is full of problems. It's the video recording of the only police interview with Martin Bryant between Inspectors Warren and Payne, and there's technical glitches with the tape. It's at points they have to get up and stop and come back again. There are a multitude of inaudible responses from Martin. So questions are asked and it literally says inaudible. So there are a lot of problems with that interview. And of course, the only aspects of that we've seen on the media are just certain segments. No one that I know has in their possession or has ever shown the full video interview between inspectors and Martin Bryant. So we don't have any context as to whether that interview may have been edited, whether it may have stopped and ceased due to the technical issues. The inspectors actually told him they were having trouble with the recording equipment. So that's on record in the written transcript. But there is problems. So I guess from a police point of view, because you're an ex-police officer, looking at that police interview with Martin Bryant, what's your perspective on the way that was conducted, the legality of it, the operation?
It's got no legality whatsoever. As soon as Martin Bryant says, "What about my lawyer?" and I think was it Payne or was it Warren who said, "It's all right, Martin, he knows." No, that's not good enough. As soon as Martin Bryant says, "My solicitor," he needs it. Then you have a look at the 92, 93 High Court decision that made Martin Bryant ruled him incapable of managing his own affairs and made him
put him on a guardianship order.
A guardianship under the provincial trustees. Again, he must have proper representative. An adult person with him, or his solicitor, or both, and he's got neither. He's got neither of that. It's all right, Martin. Don't worry. Everything does matter. But again, let's get back to that yellow Volvo.
Okay.
Michael Copping sees the Volvo at Seascape Cottage when he's driving down now. Was it about 10:30, 11? No, it couldn't be 10:30, it'd be in 11. we've got a yellow Volvo with a surfboard on top, seen at Seascape Cottage. Martin Bryant seen at Roaring Beach with his yellow Volvo with a surfboard on top. We've got 2 yellow Volvos with surfboards on top.
And yeah, it is definitely factually known that there was a second yellow Volvo that was at the Port Arthur Historic Site, driven by 2 women.
And that was seen by Paul Cooper, one of the guides and wards in there. But he was also with Vicky McLaughlin. No, that was Ashley Law and Vicky McLaughlin. Have also seen it. So we've got 3 people seeing the yellow Volvo that wasn't driven by Martin Bryant.
With the timing of Seascape and the yellow Volvo, because there are a number of different witness statements of spottings of the car, both driving and backed up against Seascape Cottage. Prior to that, we know that shots were reported by witnesses. One was Andrew Simmons.
And the other was it Doug McCutcheon?
Doug McCutcheon. Now, one of those 2 was waiting out the front. They were going to be picked up and go to work.
That was Andrew Simmons and his wife Lynn. Now, the interesting thing with McCutcheon is that he was with a mate when they heard the shots. Now, they heard 2 volleys of shots, not 2 shots as heard by Andrew and Lynn Simmons. And they said those shots were rather faint, so wouldn't have carried across the water. But if somebody is testing firearms, testing rifles to see if they work, that is what McCutcheon would have had.
And this took place roughly, according to their statements, between 10:30 and 11.
No, McCutcheon says between 10 and 11.
10, 11.
Lynn Simmons and Andrew, it's Andrew Simmons' statement, but they both between 10:30 and 11, because Andrew Simmons was waiting for his lift to take him to the managers' meeting at Swansea for the Port Arthur Historic Site senior management.
And then we have a statement that there were 2 people that were staying at Seascape Cottage that had departed, and the timing of their statement was after those gunshots were reported to have been heard, apparently at 11:15. So
that's Don Cameron Gunn and his wife Stephanie. But there's also the 2 girls there, Veronica and Julie, supposedly from Sydney. But if you consider the 2 girls that were seen by Paul Cooper in the grounds, that's Jean Andrews and her sister, Lynn Beavers. Now, Lynn Beavers ended up taking her employer to court over mental injury she received by having to go into the Broad Arrow Cafe after the shooting to identify the Commonwealth Bank employee, Anthony Nightingale.
How much did she receive in compensation after that lawsuit?
6 figures. Somebody said a couple of million, but I don't know. All I know is the report said it was a 6-figure payout.
So that's one of the few survivors from the Port Arthur Massacre that achieved a 6-figure compensation sum through a lawsuit.
Whereas, how much did Graham Collier get?
I believe the figure was somewhere in the region of $60,000.
Not much.
No.
Not much for having half his neck blown off.
And losing friends, of course. So an interesting fact is that people were not able to sue the Tasmanian government for the injuries that they sustained or the loss of them, of relatives, friends and family, and even foreign tourists who lost their lives at the Port Arthur Historic Site, which was a government-run site. To this day, I am astonished that foreign governments didn't say, look, we lost some of our citizens on your shores in a government-run facility, but there didn't seem to be any avenue to sue the government.
That's because they didn't have insurance.
You mean as in the
insurance that the management for the Port Arthur Historic Site took out Somebody came in with a cheaper set. So what they did with their insurance company is that no one ever dies, so there's no murder-suicide coverage. There was no at the Port Arthur historic site at that time.
That's something I wasn't aware of. It's still to me, and we'll get back to the yellow Volvos because it's very interesting there, but it is incredible to me that even then they could say, well, irrespective of your insurance policy, it's a government-run site and we're going to sue you civilly. I believe there were people from Malaysia, people from America, a number of different nationalities, in addition to people from all over Australia who had losses, and Port Arthur historic employees. I do understand that the Tasmanian government had brought in legislation that prevented government employees from suing on work health safety breaches, which is very convenient for them given their employees at Port Arthur Historic Site could have turned around and sued them because of the nailed shut door at the Broad Arrow Cafe.
Door. And again, Stephen Howard, your friend, tried desperately to have the coroner, Ian Mattison, open it for workplace safety matters. They just wouldn't have it.
It was shut down.
Yes.
Let's go back to this yellow Volvo. So we've got, firstly, we've got some discrepancies between the timing of when shots were heard at Seascape in the morning, which ostensibly, according to Damien Bugg, was when the owners of the cottage were murdered, David and Sally Martin, in the morning prior to the siege at Seascape. And then you've got these sightings of yellow Volvos in different locations, driven by different people. Do you know much about Jai Nichols, who was the hitchhiker? He was a
hitchhiker. His statement is that while he's hitchhiking, when he was near the Fox and Hounds Hotel, he saw the yellow Volvo with the surfboard travelling south, heading towards Port Arthur. Then at 12:30, when he's near Seascape Cottage, he sees what he believes to be the same vehicle, now heading north, braking, and he thought he was going to get a left, but it then turned right into Seascape, and that was at 12:30. So he could not have seen Martin Bryant's car travelling south, we'll say, 15, 20, 30 minutes beforehand. But if Martin Bryant's come directly from Nuvina and then pulling into Seascape Cottage. And what that also then does, it totally destroys the possibility of James and Joanne Dutton. Their statement is a complete lie. It's a complete fabrication. And you then also have Roger Lana. He said he saw them about 1 o'clock. Well, it cannot be 1 o'clock. You've got John and Maureen Mason who say that they're in a Seascape Cottage at 12:35 to 12:40 and see Martin Bryant there. They do not identify his car, but they said there was a squarish car there in the thing. Now, a squarish car would obviously, if that was Martin Bryant and he's got his car there, he cannot be driving down towards Seascape. He can't be stopping and speaking to Galen and Vicky. So
there's sightings of the yellow Volvo in two different places at different times from different witnesses, in some cases travelling in the opposite direction from each other, and in the case of Jai Nichols, reporting a yellow Volvo driving north away from the Port Arthur historic site at 12:30. Now we know that the first shots that opened fire at the Port Arthur historic site were 1:32 p.m. as reported by Wendy Skua, who called the police. So this is after that yellow Volvo was spotted by Jai Nichols heading north towards Seascape. So we have discrepancies with timing, whether there's difficulties with the witnesses. And now just going back briefly we have the Masons, who pull up at Seascape Cottage because ostensibly they want to go inside and evaluate it for staying the night. They see a squarish car parked there, and apparently a blonde-haired male comes out in an agitated state. They say, "Can we go inside and have a look?" He says, "No, my girlfriend is sleeping inside. I suggest you go away." And they get in the car and they leave. So, there is some problems with the timing. But if you can elaborate on anything about these two Volvos and these different sightings from different people, feel free.
All right, it's quite simple. Martin Bryant arrives at Seascape at about 12:30, as seen by Joe Nichols. He goes inside somehow. The car is then driven off by a Martin Bryant lookalike, who I say is Benjamin Overbeek, and you disagree with that. You say it's another one of you've got another person to line that up, but that doesn't matter. And this particular person then drives off, stops at the broken down car of Gay Lind and her friend Vicky, fixes the loose battery terminal, buys a $50 or for $50 a bag of marijuana, and says, "I'll come on down. We'll have a coffee at the at the Port Arthur site." So there's that one, and the other vehicle, the one there's other sightings, would have to be before 12:30, and that could only be driven by two girls that Donald Cameron Gunn says were Julie and Veronica, but I would say that they were Lynn Beavis and her sister Jean Andrews, and I'd say they're both ASIO, and I'll bet both balls on that. That's how serious I am.
Okay, so if we can elaborate on that, what were Lynn Beavis and did her sister come down to visit or on holidays, or what was
they went to holidays together to Tasmania. So if they're on holidays, how can Lynn Beavis sue her company for injuries she received while she was on holiday and received a six-figure payout?
What was her position, Lynn Beavis? I believe she had some job that was involved in medical evaluation of employees or something along those lines.
She was working for Audiometrics in Glenferrie Road? I think it was Glenferrie Road, 814 or something. That would have been an ASIO registered business. Anthony Nightingale was a loans officer working for the Commonwealth Bank at Nerval Park. Again, he was on a holiday, so how would Lynn Beavis know that Anthony Nightingale was inside the Port Arthur Cafe when he was shot dead?
So just to clarify this, Lynn Beavis, who was there on holidays with her sister Jean Andrews, goes down to the Port Arthur Historic Site, and even though she's on holidays, she's requested at some point to go into the cafe to determine the health of employees, including Anthony Nightingale, who was a Commonwealth Bank employee, and as a result of her trauma at that, she then sued her company
and the Commonwealth Bank.
And the Commonwealth Bank for being exposed to that trauma.
Injuries received. Now, what was I going to say again? If you read Lynn Beavis' police statement, which was taken by Senior Sergeant Paul Butt to the Homicide Squad, she sees Wendy Skerr, she sees Carolyn Lawton, she sees Graham Collier, and she also sees the dead Sarah Lawton. So it's in there, she sees it. She does not mention Anthony Nightingale. Why? Not in the police statement, but in her statement, to receive funds, or compensation for her injuries. She then said she had to go inside to identify staff from the Commonwealth Bank. In the police statement, she doesn't mention Anthony Nightingale. In her suit against Audiometrics and the Commonwealth Bank, she mentions she had to go inside to see employees of the Commonwealth Bank, and the only one there is Anthony Nightingale.
It would be interesting to know who it was that requested that she go in to identify the victims and to determine...
Well, that's quite easy to work out. He's part of her team. She's running an ASIO team at Port Arthur. One of her members was inside the Broad Arrow Cafe, which was supposed to be a safe site, and it ended up being totally stuffed, and he got shot. She had to go and find out what happened to all her workmates.
I see. So, when we discussed previously and in other episodes, we've talked about the original target being the Bundina ferry, which would take people across to the Isle of the Dead, and that the ferry had left half an hour earlier, which means that the gunmen who parked near the water's edge in a yellow Volvo then made their way and had a change of target, which was the Broad Arrow Cafe, and that the notion was that if it was an operation, there would have been plants inside that cafe to then witness the person getting onto the ferry. However, when the plans changed and the shooter went into the Broad Arrow Cafe, they may have inadvertently taken out operatives such as...
Which is why Anthony Nightingale jumped up and yelled out, "No, not here!"
Anthony Nightingale, leaps to his feet and is witnessed by Peter Croswell yelling, "No, not here," and then being shot down and killed. So the suggestion, of course, is that the shooting was never meant to take place at the Broad Arrow Cafe. As we know, I mean, we're talking about ASIO, and I did do an episode on ASIO's possible involvement in the Port Arthur Massacre. We know it's very hard to determine, because they'll never identify themselves, who was ASIO, what organisations or fronts or operations they'd be involved in, because they're an intelligence agency. By the nature of it, they'll keep themselves quiet. But I guess in this case, it is okay to have the supposition about who might have been ASIO and what they might have been doing if Port Arthur was a staged operation, a false flag operation. So it's okay to explore that. If it was, and there were operatives there, where would they be? What would they be doing? And I think we talked about the toll booth, which was the other incident where there was an odd exchange that suggested...
Yes. What's the result of talking to a murderer carrying a firearm? You don't walk away from it. Yes. Poor people didn't walk away from it. Why didn't they walk away? Because they knew the government and they thought they were safe.
We'll get onto the toll booth again, though. I think we did discuss that previously. So let's just go back a little bit. So we've still got this issue with the problem with timing, and this certainly seemed to come to the fore in the unredacted court transcript, where the prosecutor, the department,
Damien Bugg, yes.
DPP, Damien Bugg.
Don't forget his assistant, Mr. Perks.
Mr. Perks.
Perks. What a lovely name for a solicitor.
So they're basically testimony during, or the brief of the pre-trial hearing where they were going through the entirety of the events of Port Arthur. Well, there were some big problems with the timing. Timing of when things were heard, when things were seen, and also sort of negating a lot of things like the fact that there were different sightings with Volvos in different locations at different times, and certainly Martin Bryant's testimony about where he was prior to Seascape, as opposed to where other witnesses had spotted someone else in a yellow Volvo. So in essence, the crux of it is we have a problem with timing, a big problem, and witness statements. And because we had no open trial, very hard to determine from these witnesses without cross-examination exactly what they saw, what they got right, what they got wrong. I guess if we go back to Lynn Beavis, my understanding was that she was a colleague of Wendy Scour's.
Lynn Beavis, definitely not.
Okay.
Wendy Scour never knew Lynn Beavis. She saw her inside the Port Arthur Cafe, said she was absolutely useless and had no proper medical training.
So Audiometrics, who she worked for, they were, my understanding was they were a company that has in essence to look after the health and well-being of employees. So their position is to evaluate people's health and well-being prior to and also during employment. So I guess whether that means she had some form of medical training is yet to be determined. But she did receive this lawsuit payout from both the Commonwealth Bank and Audiometrics, which was one of the largest compensation payouts. But I guess your supposition is...
It would be the largest.
The largest. And your supposition is that she may have been ASIO?
No, maybe about it. No, maybe about it. Once you get onto the parson, Neville Andrews and his wife Jean Andrews, and being associated with the Inverell Forum and with the Strategy newspaper, definitely it was an all ASIO run operation.
Can you clarify the involvement of those other people, parsons and...
The parson at Neville Andrews wrote articles in the newspaper Strategy run by, I forget the name of the Ray of the publisher, but that was an ASIO operation.
So you mentioned a person by the name of Parsons and Neville Andrews, and that they had an association with Lynn Beavis. So can you clarify what that relationship was between all of those four people?
All right, no, three people. There's no person as Parsons. Neville Andrews, he wrote in the Strategy as the parson, which is a religious title. So no person, just a religious title. He wrote for the Strategy. The Strategy newspaper also supposedly funded the Inverell Forum. Robert Belgani, who was one of the heads of the Inverell Forum, was the proofreader for the Strategy newspaper.
What is the Strategy and what was Inverell Forum?
The Inverell Forum was a meeting of, shall we say, people who believed, shall we say, in conspiracy theories. And a lot of the people who were involved with the Inverell Forum were government employees from a certain intelligence thing.
And what was the Strategy newspaper?
It was a newspaper supposedly used to tell of certain naughty things that the government was doing. The Strategy was printing all the work written by my, shall we say, opposition, Joe. It printed all his stories, didn't touch mine, but printed his.
Joe Viles, you're talking about?
Yes.
So Joe Viles wrote the book Deadly Deception
at
Port Arthur, which on the surface is a deep dive into, for want of a better term, the conspiracy aspect of, though I hate that term, the conspiracy aspect of the Port Arthur Massacre. However, there is a lot of dubious associations with Joe's knowledge and history and involvement. But also, you spoke at this forum, which was the Inverell Forum, which was convened for people to discuss specifically the Port Arthur Massacre and the problems with the narrative.
No, we came in, as Robert Balgani said, the first year, that's 2001, Wendy Scour and I went there, it was the first time Inverell Forum had it run at a profit. We went back there again in 2002. Wendy went by herself in 2003, and I was invited back in 2004.
So they had ongoing, in essence, conventions where they would discuss, I guess, various different incidences and events, but both you and Wendy Skua, who was Port Arthur Historic Site employee who had provided triage to the victims and been very traumatised, and also has had some serious questions about the events at Port Arthur. Both of you were invited to speak at the Inverell Forum at various times, but at some point, are you suggesting that you were aware that there were government operatives or agents that were behind the running of that forum?
Well, the whole thing was a contrived, shall we say, thing for ASIO to control various people who didn't follow the government line.
Did you get the sense that there was on the surface it was an invitation for you to come and speak, but then that you were either intimidated or...
Oh, no, never intimidated. When we first went to the Inverell Forum, they started arranging all different places for us to speak at, from South Australia right up to the top of Queensland to Cairns as well. And we also spoke to, we did some tours in Tasmania as well, but that was mostly on the part of Olga Scully from the Conservative Speakers thing in Launceston. But no.
So you were invited to, in essence, tour Australia and speak about.
And everything was being controlled and filmed by the Inverell people at the Inverell Forum. Yes. It was
Where
all
was
controlled.
Inverell held? Where did you?
At Inverell in New South Wales.
I did hear some report that there was a convention where people had gathered to in essence dispute the official narrative on Port Arthur, and that the police had arrived in numbers to close that down. Did you have any understanding or report of that?
No, police. We did. Wendy Sker and I were booked to do a presentation at the Victoria Club at the hotel at the corner of Swanson and Little Collins Street, and it was closed down. And there's a lot of police present because at the same time Melbourne was hosting a visit from the Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu on the same night. So there's a lot of police there. The meeting was closed down and it ended up taking place at a doctor's practice in Wantirna. But no police present, but there was quite a little bit of, shall we say, agitation and people stirring and trying to create problems which we really didn't need. And after that night, we then went, Wendy Sker and I then travelled to South Australia to Hobart and a couple of other places.
It's kind of interesting. I have had someone come forward and propose to myself that on the heels of the Wasp Files that I go on a nationwide speaking tour. It sounds very similar to what you're involved with, and that if the notion is that it's all about controlling the information that comes out, then of course it creates a bit of concern about the agenda behind the people saying, let's take you around so that you can speak your truth about Port Arthur. I guess though I have seen the Inverell Forum recording, which is available online. So anyone who does want to watch the Inverell recording, which has both yourself, Andrew McGregor, and Wendy Skua and others giving their very honest and courageous testimony about disputing the Port Arthur mainstream narrative, just seems to give you a forum to be able to speak truthfully. But I guess it's, is it a case of very much like Joe Vile's book, Deadly Deception at Port Arthur, on the surface supporting an alternate narrative, but in essence creating a controlled release of information that could then be very easily discredited. I certainly got that impression from reading Joe's book, that it's a case of what I call show and no tell. that it gives you these broad strokes of information where you go, okay, Port Arthur stinks, but then it's very easy for people to say, oh, look, that's just, totally conjecture, and that's hearsay, and that's circumstance. So you would imagine that if they knew that a truthful story was coming out, that the best way to do that, rather than try and just put a lid on it, is control the narrative. And that comes back to this notion that you believe, and we've spoken at length, that ASIO certainly had involvement with the Port Arthur Massacre and in the subsequent cover-up.
Fine. Now, let's put it this way. Either Martin Bryant did the offence, did the actions, or he didn't. I think we have sufficient proof that he didn't. If he didn't, then who did and why?
I've discussed this quite a bit. Of course, people say, okay, Martin Bryant, as we know, did attend Seascape Cottage. We do know that the owners of the cottage were murdered and allegedly discovered in the burnt remains once the cottage burnt down, and that Martin had exited the following morning on fire and been arrested by the Special Operations Group, quote, grinning and out with the fairies, and that in essence he was then considered to be the person involved with the entire massacre, including the Port Arthur historic site. So Martin was at Seascape, but of course the question remains about whether the entirety of the event, whether the shooter that went into the Port Arthur historic site and committed all of the murders there, including the ones at the toll booth and at the service station when Glenn Pearce was kidnapped, was Martin Bryant in essence. So we do have Martin Bryant placed at Seascape Cottage. We have him leaving. Going back, we have him leaving his house at Newtown in the morning, grabbing a cup of coffee, going surfing, his Volvo, his very distinctive yellow Volvo with a surfboard on top, being spotted in different locations, and then somehow or other Martin Bryant ends up at Seascape Cottage to be accused of being the shooter at Port Arthur. What is he doing at Seascape Cottage? And what is the nature of the operation if Martin Bryant wasn't the shooter? We can get around to who the shooter might have been in a little bit, but we've got the reason people are saying, hey, Martin Bryant was there at Seascape. Who's to say then he didn't do the entire lot and go back and do the siege?
Again, as you have previously said, Martin Bryant was not at Seascape Cottage at about 10:40 when the shots were heard that killed David Martin, and supposedly, well, it couldn't have been Sally Martin because she was seen alive by police outside later in the afternoon. So if he's not there at one, why is he there at the others? And again, when you have a look at his police interview the whole time, he continually denies being there or killing anyone. If you have a look at his police interview, and he's talking about his abilities with the firearm, you suddenly realise that he's totally incompetent with the firearm. He shoots left-handed. Who taught him to shoot left-handed? Nobody taught him to shoot. He learned it by himself by watching things, and he's copied them mirror style. Interesting. So, how could Martin Bryant change from being an absolute gawk or geek with a firearm to being so professionally competent as a shooter inside Broad Arrow Cafe? Then you ask the question, how can a person who shoots 35 people dead and wounds, was it 19 others? 23. Then goes to the Seascape Cottage where he's surrounded by police and doesn't want to hit one of them.
Yeah, that's interesting that Martin Bryant is identified as being at Seascape Cottage during a police negotiation call where he's calling himself Jamie and he's talking to Terry McCarthy. Going back to the yellow Volvo, We know that Martin Bryant's yellow Volvo was abandoned at the toll booth after the murder of the 4 occupants of the bronze BMW that was then commandeered by the gunman. And once the yellow Volvo was investigated, in the glove box was Martin Bryant's passport.
No.
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 Okay. Explain to me how the police had reported. We searched the Volvo and we found Martin Bryant's passport.
They never said that. Peter Hessman is dropped in at the Port Arthur historic site by a police car. I would stipulate that that police car was driven by Sergeant Andrew Fogarty. He's the only person with a police car that's available to do that job at that time. He's dropped in at the site, so he goes inside. He then at some stage shows Eileen Kingston the passport of Martin Bryant. And Eileen Kingston identifies from that passport the driver of the Volvo that she bought purchased a ticket from her with a $50 note. She identifies Martin Bryant as the driver of the Volvo, not as the person that she sees shooting the Mikacs and doing other horrible things that frighten the hell out of her.
So Eileen Kingston was in essence stationed at the toll booth, which was the entrance to the historic site where you have to pay your money to enter the site.
Yes.
And she witnessed, of course, the altercation that took place at the toll booth where the yellow Volvo pulled up and there was a conversation held within that car with the blonde-haired gunman and 2 of the occupants from the other vehicle that were not at gunpoint, but they're having a conversation in the front of the yellow Volvo, or one person was in the front and one in the rear. And she witnesses this altercation where eventually all 4 occupants of the BMW...
She doesn't witness it, she hears it.
She hid, didn't she?
She hid in the toilet. And she couldn't see, but she could hear most of it. But she identifies Martin Bryant as arriving in at about 1:15. But he didn't, he arrived in about 12:40. Because when the gunman arrived, the gunman arrived in the yellow Volvo, Stephen Howard was also with her at the time when she received the $50 note. And Stephen Howard does testify to that. So that's the only time that Eileen Kingston identifies the gunman as Martin Bryant from his passport, but only as the person who drove into the site. That's on her statement. And Eileen Kingston, was at that stage back around the information centre or the thing. She was no longer at the toll booth. Ethel Bloomfield had taken her away, sort of thing, to get her off, because what had occurred there had absolutely terrified her, so he took her back to the main building for so that she could calm down and relax, or get over what she'd seen. So when Peter Hessman has interviewed her and shown the passport, it wasn't at the toll booth, and he hadn't been seen going to the yellow Volvo. So where did he get the passport from? Now you go back to the police negotiator tape where he's talking about the passport, and then he says, it must be in the glove box. It wasn't in the glove box of his car. Somebody had taken it from Martin Bryant when he wasn't being observant. But somebody took his passport and his wallet. You then go and listen to Terry Hill, the gun dealer that had held Martin Bryant's AR-10, when he took it into the police station to hand it in. The watch house keeper, who handles the miscellaneous property books for the entrance, took Terry Hill out to the police compound and showed him the yellow Volvo sitting in the compound. And on the, the dashboard of that thing was Martin Bryant's wallet. That's what Terry Hill told me. So that was, shall we say, the day or 2 days after when he took the AR-10 in to hand over to the police. The watch housekeeper showed him Martin Bryant's car, and on the dashboard was Martin Bryant's wallet. What's it doing there? It's not in Martin Bryant's pocket. It's not in the glove box. It's on the glove box. On the dashboard. So somebody's put it there after the police have taken possession and searched the car.
So just to clarify for everyone, Terry Hills was the owner of Guns and Ammo in Tasmania and was accused of being the gun dealer that sold the Colt SB1 or AR-15 to Martin Bryant, which he denied. He does, however, report that a blonde-haired person with one of the new plastic laminated gun licenses, apparently authorised for both semi and fully automatic weapons, came into Guns and Ammo with an AR-10, which is a 308 version of a semi-automatic rifle, fairly similar to the AR-15 style, but a much higher calibre, and that the licence was made out in the name Martin Ryan, and that this person had handed the AR-10 over to Terry Hills and said, "There's something wrong with this." It was wrapped in a towel. Terry took the gun, took the magazine out, and was distressed to see that it was fully loaded.
He worked the action to ensure that there's no cartridge up the spout. Terry Hill found out, when he worked the action, the cartridge popped out.
So Martin Ryan, who had supposedly a laminated gun licence, though we know that the police have confirmed that Martin Bryant did not have a gun licence, also didn't have a driver's licence, coincidentally, though he certainly drove everywhere, came into this store and handed over. Now, this is supposedly the very proficient shooter that killed 35 men, women and children with headshots, shooting from the hip, and then went on to undertake the siege. Didn't know about bringing in the safety aspect of a fully loaded AR-10 rifle into a gun store. And so the rifle was taken by Terry. He worked the action, discovered there was a round in the chamber, and then took the gun and said, "Look, I can't look at this until after Easter." So the AR-10 was taken into the custody of Terry Hills, and this gun dealer, you were saying then, was called to identify the yellow Volvo by the police.
No. When he was taking the rifle in, the AR-10, into the police to hand it in, the watch housekeeper treated him like a boy. Said, "Yeah, you want to see his Volvo? We've got it out back. Come and have a look." So he did, and when he saw the Volvo, there was the Martin Bryant's wallet on the dashboard.
So he was invited to take a look at it, and in essence, oh look, there's his wallet. So you spoke to Terry Hills.
Terry Hill told me that, yes.
Terry Hills is sadly deceased. I did speak to his wife Dorothy at great length about the accusations that were levelled against him in relation to selling that firearm, the Colt SB1 or AR-15, which he denied. He was intimidated by letter from Martin Bryant's defence lawyer, John Avery.
No. John Avery was Terry Hill's solicitor.
I did hear that as well.
If you read the letter that Terry Hill received from John Avery, he's writing it as Terry Hill's solicitor, giving Terry Hill advice to follow and do through what the police require or else.
Yeah, that's unusual then, because if he was the lawyer for Terry Hills, the letter in essence states that he was accused of selling the gun, which he denied, and that John Avery was saying that the police believe that you did sell the rifle, and that if you confess to that, you will be immune from prosecution. However, if you continue to deny the sale, the wording I heard, the wording I read was, we will continue to find something to charge you with.
Now that's blackmail.
Well, it is, considering if that comes from your own lawyer. It's saying, well, hang on, who are you representing? Me or the police? And that's exactly what happened. Terry held his staunch defence of the fact that he didn't sell that gun. His gun store was raided. His actual home was raided. Dorothy told me she was in the shower at the time, and Terry was not well and was also dealing with a very sick relative, and she came out of the shower to discover the police had raided in force, and they were forced to go down to Guns and Ammo, open up the store, go through the books.
And take the books.
Yeah, the books were seized, and Guns and Ammo's dealer's licence was revoked, so they shut down their business. However, they did allow both Terry and Dorothy to keep their personal gun licences. So in essence, Terry paid the price for saying he wasn't the gun dealer that sold the Colt SP1. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Wasp Files. New episodes will be uploaded every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Feel free to share far and wide, and please see the links to the Dropbox files and information relating to the episodes. Also, without any obligation, please see the Buy Me a Coffee campaign, which helps keep the channel running and also provides profits to my friends who are survivors from Port Arthur who have supported me on this journey. Thank you.